as if spoken aloud, around a fire on a long winter's night. She had no name, no shoes, no memory of comfort, only the raw scrape of wind against bare skin, the whisper of hunger in her bones, and the pitiful shelter of a ripped plastic tarp. She lived between shadows in a forgotten barn, more ghost than girl, watched by empty-eyed animals and darker things that once knew hope, but had since abandoned it. But on one storm-shattered night, a single father saw through the silence, through the cold that had nearly claimed her. And what he whispered to her in that breathless moment would change both their lives forever. If your heart leans into stories where love shows up uninvited, where kindness finds you when you've forgotten how to believe in it, then come close. Sit down. Let me tell you the story of the girl who fell from a storm. The wind had teeth that night, sharp, relentless. It howled across the Colorado plains with the rage of a wounded beast, tearing through fence lines and slamming into the wooden bones of the old Callahan farmhouse like it meant to drag the whole place into oblivion. Snow flew sideways in blinding sheets, turning the land into a blur of white and shadow. Inside the cabin, the fire sputtered and hissed as if protesting the storm, its flickering light reflecting off worn floorboards and a pair of boots crusted in dried mud. Ethan Callahan stood at the window, hand pressed against the cold glass, the other wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee he no longer tasted. He'd weathered countless blizzards before, but this one felt different, heavier somehow, like the sky wasn't just unleashing snow, like it was warning him. Behind him, his 8-year-old son, Jacob, slept curled on the couch, buried under a thick wool blanket, a half-open copy of The Little Prince resting on his chest. Ethan took a slow sip, then paused. A sound. Not wind. Not storm. A thud. Muffled. Distant. Then again closer. The barn. He set the mug down and pulled on his coat, his movements urgent but quiet. He grabbed the flashlight, its beam trembling to life, and opened the door into the howling night. The wind slapped him full in the face. He bowed into it, pushing forward through knee-deep snow, the flashlight slicing across swirling white chaos. The barn loomed ahead like a phantom, and as he yanked open the heavy door, it groaned like something waking from a long sleep. Inside was dark, musty. The wind moaned through a broken slat high above. His boots crunched on old straw. And then, movement. He swept the beam toward the farthest corner. There, curled into herself, was a girl, barefoot, half-naked, skin kissed by frost, her frame swallowed in a thin plastic tarp clutched around her like the memory of warmth. Her eyes, wide, unblinking, met his, and in them, Ethan saw something that punched the breath from his lungs. Terror. Soul-deep, wordless terror. Jesus, he breathed, already kneeling. Her pulse trembled beneath his fingers, fragile, but still there. He pulled off his coat, wrapped her in it, and gently lifted her. She weighed less than a child, all brittle bones and cold. She smelled of fear, dirt, and something darker. Ash, maybe. Smoke. Burned wood. Outside, the storm screamed again. He shielded her as best he could, head bent, shoulders hunched, trudging back toward the flickering light of home. Inside, he laid her near the fire, the heat licking at her frozen limbs. Jacob stirred, rubbing his eyes. Dad. Ethan pressed a finger to his lips. Stay there, bud. He fetched a quilt and wrapped her in it, then opened the old cedar chest in the armoire, Ava's things. His late wife's scarf lay folded at the bottom, soft with time and memory, red as the last embers of sunset. He draped it gently across the girl's shoulders. Her fingers curled around it, clutching it like a lifeline. Is she dead? Jacob asked, his voice small. No, Ethan said, watching the girl's trembling chest. She's still here. The girl's lips parted. A whisper escaped. Run, she said. Then her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed into the rug's embrace. Ethan didn't sleep. He fed the fire, draped her in blankets, coaxed spoonfuls of warm broth past her lips whenever she stirred. He called the sheriff. No signal. The lines were down again. Jacob stayed quiet, watching, understanding more than most kids ever should. He'd seen loss up close. He knew how quickly things could vanish. Dawn came. muted, pale. The storm passed, leaving the world blanketed in a hush so deep it felt sacred. The girl slept, her breathing steadier. Her cheeks, once gray with cold, were slowly flushed with life. Ethan left soft clothes beside her, sweats, a flannel shirt, thick wool socks. When she finally stirred, it was Jacob who noticed. He grinned and scooted closer. "You fell from a star," he said matter-of-factly. She blinked. "That's why Daddy says you don't have a name," Jacob went on. "But you can borrow one. I think I'll call you Star." And something shifted. Not much, just a flicker. But Ethan saw it. A thaw deep in her eyes. The kind of hope that had once forgotten how to breathe. She didn't speak for days, but she stayed, wrapped in Ava's scarf like armor, hands curled around a mug of broth she never drank. Her clothes hung loose, borrowed skin. Jacob hovered nearby, crayons in hand, coloring scenes of stars and wild things. He watched her like one might watch a deer, in awe, but with care. Ethan gave her space, moved through the house with quiet hands, boiled tea, peeled apples, didn't ask questions. He had learned better, but when she flinched at a rattling window, when her eyes flicked toward the door, always calculating escape, he knew she hadn't stopped running, only paused. Later, he brought her a towel, a brush, bathrooms down the hall. "Warm water," he said gently. She nodded, eyes cast down. Then he knelt beside her. "You don't have to talk, but I need you to know you're safe here. I don't care where you came from, or what you're running from. This house, it's a sanctuary." She looked at him, really looked. Her eyes filled, not with tears, she had none left, but with the kind of aching that almost remembered how to cry. When she came out of the bathroom later, her hair was damp and combed, the scarf still wrapped tight. She sat beside Jacob. He held out a crayon. "Want to color with me?" She hesitated, then took the blue one. That evening, Ethan placed a bowl of stew in front of her. "It's not poisoned," he said with a soft smirk, a twitch of her lips, a ghost of a smile, but real. He sat across from her. "Can I ask something?" She froze. "Not your name," he said quickly. "I figure, if you wanted me to know, you'd tell me." She relaxed slightly. "What does run mean to you?" he asked gently. She stared at her spoon, then whispered, "It means don't look back." He nodded. "Yeah, that's what I figured." Jacob believed she came from the stars. When Ethan told her that, she blinked in surprise. "Is that what you're calling me?" "Star," he nodded. He's 8. Magic still makes sense to him. She let that sit, then whispered, "It's better than what I used to be." "What did you used to be?" She didn't answer, but her silence thundered. The snow kept falling for 3 more days. No phone, no roads, just the cabin, the woods, the fire. A world shrunk to a single heartbeat, and in that small world, Star began to exist. She folded Jacob's blankets, brushed snow from the porch, washed dishes without being asked. She didn't talk much, but her presence warmed the air. Ethan saw how Jacob lit up, how Star lingered by the fire with Ava's books, how at night she'd sit alone, staring at the flames, her face haunted by things unspoken. And Ethan knew that look. He had lived it. On the 4th morning, the skies cleared. Ethan found her in the barn, brushing the mule. "You're good with animals," he said. "They don't ask questions," she murmured. He nodded. "You don't have to stay. When the road clears, you're free to go." "I don't have anywhere to go," she whispered. "You do now," he replied. She looked at him, uncertain. "Jacob's taken to you, and I don't mind the company." Her face softened. "I don't know how to be anything," she said. "You don't have to be," Ethan replied. "You're here. That's enough." That night, Jacob pointed at the stars outside. "There," he said. "That's the one you came from." Star looked up, and for the first time, in what felt like forever, she didn't feel like she was running. She felt like she was home. She still didn't speak much, but the silence around her had shifted. No longer a wall, no longer the cold echo of something broken. It felt intentional now, like the hush of a sanctuary rather than the void of abandonment. Ethan had always believed there were many shades to silence. There was the silence of morning, deep, hollow, and stretching far beyond the final goodbye. Then there was the silence of survival, where sound itself became dangerous, where quiet was safety. But the silence she carried, it was the silence of someone patiently, painfully, waiting for permission to become a person again. Each morning, Ethan rose with the same rhythm, habitual, comforting. He brewed coffee in the old dented percolator, pouring 2 mugs without ceremony, one black and bitter for himself, and the other lightened with milk and sweetened with honey. She never asked, never even acknowledged it, but she always finished the one with honey. So he kept making it that way. Jacob, still bleary-eyed and wrapped in his dinosaur blanket, would shuffle into the kitchen and ask the same thing every morning. Is the star lady still here? She's not a star, Bud, Ethan would say with a faint smile, though part of him wasn't so sure. Then he'd glance over at her, sitting cross-legged near the hearth, steam rising from her mug, hair clinging to her temples, scarf wound tight, like a thread of sky around her throat. And maybe, just maybe she was. It wasn't a grand gesture that shifted everything. It never is. It was the wind. Jacob was outside building a snow fort. Ethan was crouched over a broken drawer, with glue staining his fingers. A sudden gust slammed a shutter against the cabin with a crack like thunder, or worse, gunfire. She dropped a bowl she'd been drying. It shattered into porcelain stars across the floor, and she crumbled with it. No scream, no sound, just folded knees, hands over her head, her entire body curling inward like a closing flower. She trembled so fiercely Ethan thought she might seize. He was at her side in a breath. Hey, it's all right. His voice was low but urgent, reaching for her not with hands, but with warmth. It's just the wind, just a shudder. She didn't respond, didn't lift her head. He didn't touch her, didn't rush her. He simply knelt beside her, letting his words soften into the quiet. You're safe. You're in my kitchen, remember? The fire's going. Jacob's just outside. It's just me and a broken shutter. Her breathing came in uneven gasps. Slowly, like a thaw, her fingers unfurled. Ethan saw then what fear could do, how it didn't always scream or rage. Sometimes it whispered from the bones, haunting in its silence. He sat beside her, cross-legged on the cold linoleum. When my wife died, he said, as if speaking to the walls, I stopped fixing things. The barn roof leaked, the door squeaked for 2 whole years. I let it all fall apart, because fixing things meant remembering, and remembering hurt more than the silence. She turned her head toward him, eyes rimmed with unshed sorrow. Then one night, he continued, Jacob asked me if the house was going to fall apart, like Mom did. He gave a soft, humorless chuckle. So the next day, I picked up my hammer. A beat of silence passed. I don't know what happened to you, he said, his voice gentle. But I know what it's like to live inside something broken, and I know it doesn't stay broken forever. She looked at him then. At him. Not through, not past, like he was a hand reaching out of the dark. Like she wasn't sure she could take it yet, but she wanted to believe she could. I used to be a person, she whispered. He didn't correct her. You still are, he said. That night, after Jacob had gone to bed, she sat by the fire, sketching something faint on a scrap of paper with a dull pencil. Ethan didn't interrupt. He just let her be. She hadn't left the house in 2 days. Her voice, when it finally came, was steadier. Why did your wife keep that scarf? Ethan looked up from his chair. She made it when we were dating, he said with a small smile. Wore it on our first date, and the last morning she was well enough to sit on the porch. He paused. I couldn't throw it away. Star traced the paper's edge with her thumb. I don't have anything like that, she murmured. Ethan's eyes softened. Then maybe it's time to start collecting new things. And slowly, piece by piece, she began to return. She started in the kitchen, chopping vegetables, folding towels, stirring stew with quiet purpose. One afternoon, Jacob said something silly and unexpected, and she laughed. A real laugh. Sharp, surprised, like it had slipped out before she could catch it. Another evening, as snow whispered against the windows, she asked if she could help chop firewood. Ethan handed her the smaller axe. She missed the first few swings. Then she found her rhythm. By the 10th log, she was smiling. One morning, while Ethan was repairing the shutter, Jacob walked up to her, holding his sketchbook. "This is you," he said proudly. It was a stick figure in a big scarf, standing under a sky full of stars. She blinked, touched. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "I'm going to hang it in my room." She leaned down. "Why the stars?" He shrugged. "Because you were falling before, but now you're staying." She looked again at the drawing, then at the boy, and for the first time, she didn't feel like a shattered thing. She felt real. It was the night of the full moon, when she finally spoke without fear. The cabin was hushed, wrapped in smoke and snow. Outside, the world glittered silver and untouched. Inside, Jacob was asleep, flashlight under his covers, sketchbook open. Ethan sat by the fire, a mug of tea warming his palms. Star stood at the window, Ava's scarf around her shoulders, like it had always belonged to her. She had changed, grown steadier, fuller. Not healed, not yet, but no longer hollow. "You always sit in that chair," she said softly. Ethan looked up. "Habit," he replied. She turned toward the firelight. "Did you sit there when she died?" There was no bitterness in her tone, just quiet curiosity. He nodded. "I sat here the night we found out the cancer had spread, and the night Jacob asked if I thought she still watched us." She stepped closer. "And do you?" Ethan stared into the fire. "I think she watches him," he said. "I think she'd like that he still sings in the shower." Star gave the faintest smile. "You didn't ask me about what happened." "I figured you'd tell me when you were ready." She hesitated, then sat, slowly, on the rug. "I was with someone," she began. "At first he was charming. Kind. He made me feel seen." Her hands clenched over her knees. "But then he began to control everything. What I wore, who I saw, when I could leave. The first time I tried to escape, he locked me in the basement for 2 days." Ethan's jaw tightened, silent. "I ran in the middle of the night. Took nothing. No ID. No money. Just ran. The storm hid my tracks." Ethan exhaled. "You made it far enough." Her eyes met his, searching. "He told me no one would want me, that no one would even know I existed." "He was wrong," Ethan said quietly. She looked down. "Part of me still believes him." "Then let me be clear," he said, leaning in. "You are seen. You are real. You matter." A tear slipped down her cheek, unnoticed. "Why are you being so kind to me?" "Because someone was kind to me when I didn't think I deserved it. And because Jacob calls you Star like it's the most natural thing in the world." "I'm not used to kindness," she whispered. "You'll get there." That night, they stood together on the porch, breath curling like ghosts into the sky. "Do you think people can become someone else?" she asked. "Not pretend. Not hide. Really become." He looked at her, not at her scars or shadows, but at her strength. "I think we become who we were always meant to be," he said, "once we stop believing the lies." She nodded barely. "Then maybe I'll start here." "You already have." The next morning, she was up first, burning the pancakes, batter too thick, skillet too hot, and laughing. Jacob walked in, teasing. "Are you trying to poison us?" Ethan stood in the doorway, watching, hair tied back messily, apron askew, flour on her cheek, and something in his chest ached in the best way. Not love, not yet, but something that looked like the very beginning. Later, she found an old shoebox filled with Polaroids. Ava's bright laugh. Ethan before the gray. One photo of Ava in the red scarf, fresh snow swirling around her. "Why red?" Star asked. She said it made her feel alive. Star pulled it tighter around her neck. "Then maybe it'll do the same for me." Spring came slowly, grudgingly, as it always does. Snow receded. Earth reappeared. And in the cabin, something new bloomed. She woke early now, not from fear, but choice. Helped with chores. Cooked meals that filled the air with warmth. She became part of it. Not a visitor, not a shadow, a thread in their home. And though no one said it, the question always lingered. What happens when the road clears? But for now, they didn't speak it. Because sometimes, healing begins not with answers, but with pancakes, a red scarf, and the quiet, steady beat of choosing to stay. He answered politely at the counter, offering short replies, but never let his attention stray far from the soft crackle of the police scanner behind him. Its static murmur was his habit now, a quiet sentinel in his ear. Nothing out of the ordinary buzzed through. He picked up the essentials, coffee, flour, a handful of crisp apples, and almost without thinking, added a bottle of lavender shampoo to his basket. The cashier noticed, raised an eyebrow at the oddity of it, but said nothing. Ethan gave a small nod, barely perceptible, and left without explanation. Back at the cabin, the yard had become a stage for something beautifully mundane. Jacob was hunched over, carefully shaping a snowman's body, his little gloves smeared with slush. Star stood nearby, arms crossed, chin lifted, supervising him like a pint-sized construction foreman. She wore Ethan's old winter coat, the sleeves still too long, and a woolen beanie tugged down over her ears. It made her look so heartbreakingly young that it caught Ethan off guard. When she spotted his truck pulling in, she waved with innocent joy. The sight of it, so ordinary, so full of warmth, stole the breath from his chest. That evening, after Jacob had curled into sleep, Star stood at the sink, her hand submerged in suds, methodically washing dishes. Ethan stood beside her, towel in hand, drying one plate at a time. "You were gone longer than I expected," she said, passing him a bowl without looking. "Picked up a few extra things," Ethan replied, his tone casual. "Supplies. Roads are clear now, all the way to Pine Grove." She gave a small nod, eyes locked on the stream of warm water running over porcelain. "So the outside world's open again." "Seems so." Silence folded itself between them, not sharp or uneasy, just hesitant. A breath held too long. She rinsed a final bowl and placed it on a rack, then turned slowly to face him. "What happens now?" Ethan dried his hands on the towel with care, like the question deserved ceremony. "We keep going, keep living. Same as yesterday." Her voice was gentle, but there was something aching underneath. "I mean with me." He looked at her, really looked, searching her face like it held a map to something unspoken. "Do you still feel like you need to run?" She shook her head once. "No, but I don't know what I'm allowed to want." Ethan exhaled, steady and low. "I can't speak for the whole world, but in this house, you're allowed to want whatever makes you feel alive." A slow smile unfurled on her lips, small, vulnerable, but honest. "What if I just want more mornings like today?" Ethan's voice was soft, certain. "Then I'd say, you're not alone." The next day, Ethan drove her into town. He said it was time she had a proper name, legally, at least, and maybe a library card, too. They stopped first at the sheriff's office to follow up on the initial report. Star sat quietly beside him, hands folded neatly in her lap, chin lifted in quiet courage. The deputy combed through their records. "No matches to her description," he said after a few moments. "No missing person reports from this region. Not in the time frame you gave." He studied her, eyes sharp but not unkind. "You sure you want to stay off-grid?" She looked at Ethan, then back at the deputy. "I'm not trying to disappear. I'm just trying to begin again." That seemed to be enough. At the town clerk's office, the paperwork felt like a ritual. Ethan stood nearby as she filled it out, each line a quiet declaration. When she reached the space labeled name, she paused. Then, with the kind of care usually reserved for prayers, she wrote, "Hope Leonard." Ethan noticed the pause of her pen, the flutter in her chest as she released that name into the world like a fragile bird. She glanced at him, almost bashful. "Hope," he murmured. "It suits you." That night, they celebrated with apple pie. Homemade, sweet, a little too tart, and 2 melting scoops of vanilla ice cream. Jacob sang a song made up on the spot, something about snowmen and waffles. Ethan poured a touch of whiskey into his tea. For the first time in weeks, Hope, her name no longer wrapped in air quotes, stood at the window, mug in hand, staring out over a yard bathed in moonlight. "Do you think," she asked softly, "that it's possible to love a place not because of what it is, but because of who you became there?" Ethan stepped beside her. "Absolutely." She turned, eyes luminous. "I never knew what safe felt like, until now." He didn't answer with words, just reached for her hand, giving it a gentle, grounding squeeze. Outside, the snow continued to retreat, revealing shy shoots of green, the first stubborn crocus poking through the frozen earth. Spring was coming, uncertain but determined. By late afternoon, the sky had dulled to pewter. Ethan stood by the fence, repairing a loose rail, the weight of a hammer balanced in one hand, nails in his mouth. Behind him, Jacob read aloud to Hope from a battered book, his voice full of earnest effort. She listened with a blanket over her knees, each word knitting something back together inside her. Then a truck rumbled up the drive. It was dark green, dust-caked, with a chrome grille that gleamed like a predator's grin. Not local. Ethan would have known if it was. He stood straighter, hammer still in hand. A man stepped out, tall, lean, eyes sharp as broken glass. His coat was black and heavy, his smile forced. "Afternoon," he said, voice slick with false charm. Ethan felt something coil tight in his gut. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for someone," the man replied, his eyes flicking toward the porch. "Heard there's a girl staying out here. Brown hair. Been missing a few weeks." Jacob's voice faltered. Hope went still. Ethan stepped forward, body subtly shielding the house. "What's your name?" "Matt Leonard," the man said smoothly. "She's my wife." Ethan didn't blink. "That's so. She left in a state," Matt continued, chuckling as if recounting a joke. "Probably told you some wild stories. She's good at that." Behind Ethan, the screen door creaked. Hope stepped out slowly, face pale, lips a thin line. Her body was steady, but Ethan saw the tremor in her fingers as they gripped the doorframe. "Go back inside," he said without turning. Matt's head tilted, eyes locking on her. "There you are, sweetheart." She didn't answer, didn't move. "You're trespassing," Ethan said. "You need to leave." "I'm her husband. I don't care if you're the damn Pope. Get in your truck and leave." Matt's smile cracked. "I'm not leaving without her." "That's not your call." The silence was taut as wire. Matt stepped forward. Ethan didn't lift the hammer, but he didn't lower it either. The air between them thinned to something brittle. Then sirens pierced the tension, faint, then louder. 2 patrol cars kicking up dust down the road, lights flashing blue and red against the gray. Matt's eyes narrowed. "You called them?" "No," Ethan said. "They've been looking for you." At the sheriff's office, Matt was booked, charged with domestic assault, unlawful imprisonment, interstate threats. The warrant had been waiting in another state. It just needed time to catch up. Hope sat across from Ethan, her hands trembling in her lap. She kept glancing at the holding cell window, half expecting the nightmare to re-emerge. "You don't have to run any more," Ethan said gently, covering her hand with his. Her lip quivered. "I don't know how to stop." That night, back at the cabin, the silence was not peaceful. It was raw. Hope sat curled near the fire, knees to chest, staring into the flames like they held secrets she wasn't ready to hear. "I keep thinking it's not real," she whispered. "That he'll come back. Find a way. He won't. You don't know that." "I do," Ethan said. "I know men like him. And I know people like you. People who survive." She looked at him, red-eyed, fierce. "I wasn't anything. I believed him when he said I didn't exist. You believe differently now. I want to." Ethan reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded paper. "Found this in your coat." The word run was still visible, though smudged with time and rain. She stared at it. Then, without flinching, dropped it into the fire. It curled, blackened, vanished. "I'm not that girl anymore," she said. "No," Ethan said. "You're not." Later that night, she stepped barefoot onto the porch, letting the cold air bite her skin. It grounded her. Stars stretched overhead like a blessing. Ethan joined her. They said nothing, standing there like survivors baptized by winter. "I chose the name Hope," she said eventually, "because it sounded like something impossible. Something people say when they've got nothing left." "It's not impossible," he said. "No," she whispered. "Now it's not." He sat beside her on the wooden floor, his presence steady, quiet, and grounding. The boy nestled against her, feverish and restless, but safe. Ethan's silence carried the weight of something solid, something unwavering. He was strong, and that strength, Hope recognized, was not born from discipline or hardship alone. It was inherited, perhaps from a mother who had taught him what steadfast love looked like. Hope looked over at him, but in her gaze was something new, something Ethan hadn't seen in her eyes before. It wasn't sorrow or thanks or the quiet burden of guilt. No, it was fierce. It was fire. It was the look of someone who had finally found something worth defending. "I never had anyone sit with me like this," she whispered, voice barely more than a breath. "Not when I was sick. Not when I was scared." Her fingers brushed Jacob's damp hair. "No one ever whispered that I mattered. No one told me I'd be okay. But he's getting that from you. From us. And I want him to have it." Her eyes shimmered. "I'm so scared I'll lose this," she admitted, voice cracking under the weight of that terror. Ethan's voice was low and calm, like water smoothing over stones. "You won't." She turned to face him, eyes wide and raw. "How do you know?" He hesitated, then replied with quiet certainty. "Because this time, you're not alone." And by morning, Jacob's fever had broken. He stirred awake with bleary eyes and a hoarse, sleepy voice. But what he said, "Can I have pancakes?" made Ethan's heart exhale for the first time in days. Hope let out a laugh, half tears, half giddy disbelief, and pulled Jacob into her arms with such relief that he squealed. "You were worried," he mumbled, curling back under his blanket. "Of course I was," she whispered. He squinted up at her, eyelids heavy. "You're like a mom now." Hope froze. The words hit her like a bell rung deep inside her chest. She said nothing. Couldn't. Ethan glanced at her, face unreadable, guarded. Jacob yawned and drifted off again, leaving her standing in a silence louder than any scream. "I didn't mean," she began, but Ethan stepped forward, gentle. He seized the truth. Hope shook her head. "I'm not ready. I'm not whole." He took her hands, rough fingers curling around hers. "You don't have to be perfect to love someone. You just have to show up." She swallowed hard. Her breath caught somewhere between her ribs. "I never thought I'd have this," she whispered. "Not a family. Not peace." Ethan held her gaze. "You think this is peace?" She nodded, blinking away tears. "The kind I used to dream about, right before waking up to cold and dark." He stepped closer. "This isn't a dream. This is real. And it's yours." The tears came freely then, and for the first time, they weren't born of pain. They were the kind that come when you finally stop running, when you realize you've arrived. That evening, after dinner, Ethan found her in the barn. She was brushing the mule, her movements slow and rhythmic, as if grounding herself with every stroke. The lantern cast a warm amber glow across the wooden beams, making everything feel suspended in golden stillness. "I used to be afraid of this," she said quietly. "The quiet, the stillness. It reminded me of waiting for something bad to happen." "And now?" he asked. She turned toward him, eyes steady. "Now I want to protect it." Ethan stepped inside, then protect it with us. Her breath hitched. "You mean that?" He nodded. "I've never met anything more." She didn't hesitate. She met him halfway, not out of desperation or fear, but as someone who had chosen to believe again. In the scent of hay and warm wood, they held each other, not because they were broken, but because they had been, and still dared to build something beautiful. Spring arrived quietly, like hope slipping back into the room. Snow melted into soft soil. Wild crocuses bloomed at the edge of the tree lane, defying everything winter had buried. The barn carried scent of thawed hay and damp earth. Songbirds returned, and Jacob named each one with gleeful confidence, though almost always wrong. Hope had made a habit of sitting barefoot on the porch in the mornings, coffee in hand, watching the world yawn back to life. Sometimes she scribbled in a leather-bound notebook she rarely shared. Other times, she just sat, eyes half-lidded, soaking in the miracle of a life she never imagined she'd have. Ethan would watch her through the kitchen window, never interrupting. He had learned. Hope blossomed in stillness, not in urgency. One Saturday, Jacob demanded donuts from town, an old tradition Ethan hadn't thought about since Ava's death. Hope smiled and said she'd stay behind, laundry to do and carrots to plant. Her hands no longer trembled with uncertainty. They worked the earth like they belonged there. When Ethan and Jacob returned, 2 boxes of pastries in hand, Hope stood by the trellis in a pale blue blouse and jeans rolled at the ankles. Her face flushed, eyes glowing. Ethan saw her, and in that moment, a future he'd never let himself imagine came clearly into focus. A life not borrowed, not fragile, real. That evening they ate on the porch. Fried chicken, potato salad, peach cobbler born from canned fruit and sheer will. The breeze carried the scent of lilacs. Jacob fell asleep on the swing, comic book rising and falling with his chest. Hope and Ethan sat on the steps, shoulders brushing. She turned to him. I used to think normal was for other people. He sipped his tea. And now I think normal is a quiet evening with people who don't expect me to disappear. He smiled. We're not expecting you to vanish, Hope. A beat passed. Then she said, I've been meaning to ask. Ask what? She looked at him fully. What happens now between us? He drew a breath. I think I've loved you for a while. Quietly, without asking for anything. She didn't flinch. Instead, she reached for his hand. I'm not broken anymore, she said, but I'm still learning how to live. He leaned forward. Then stay. We'll learn together. Her voice wavered. What if I mess it up? He touched his forehead to hers. Then we start again. Every day if we have to. Her whisper was barely there. Are you sure? His hand brushed her cheek. Stay with me. Forever. Tears shimmered in her eyes. I was waiting for you to say that. The days that followed didn't change. They deepened. Meals became celebrations. Laughter wove into the fabric of everyday life. The future was no longer a question mark. Hope filed her legal name change at the courthouse. The same clerk who once looked at her with suspicion now smiled warmly. At the library, she applied to volunteer for children's story time. Under previous work experience, she wrote, caretaker, resilient survivor. At home, she replanted Ava's flower bed with Jacob by her side, both of them naming each bulb like christening new beginnings. One night in early May, Ethan pulled out an old photo album. They sat on the living room floor, turning pages of worn Polaroids. Ava's wind-blown hair, Jacob as a baby, birthdays, camping trips. Hope traced one photo, Ava in a red scarf, snowflakes caught in her lashes. She looks like someone who laughed easily, Hope said. She did, Ethan replied, especially when everything was falling apart. Hope nodded slowly. She would have liked this. Us, Ethan smiled. I think she does. Hope didn't look away when he said it. Later that night, Hope whispered, Thank you for not giving up on me. Ethan kissed her temple. You gave me a reason to begin again. It wasn't perfect. Hope still woke from nightmares. Ethan still kept Ava's coffee mug in the back of the cupboard. Jacob still asked questions about heaven, about loss, about stars and memory. But it was real. It was theirs. One morning, Hope stood in the kitchen doorway, dirt on her hands, flour on her cheek, and said, I think this is the first place I've ever truly felt I belong. Ethan smiled and kissed her forehead. Then let's keep building it. One morning at a time, and then the knock came. It was a Tuesday, warm sun on the porch rail, bees buzzing lazily among the lilacs, Jacob drawing chalk animals in the barn shade. Hope was in the kitchen, kneading dough. Ethan, fresh from chopping wood, still had sweat cooling on his skin when the knock echoed through the house. 3 knocks. Hope froze. Ethan went to the window. A man stood on the porch, older, tired, in a wrinkled suit. Not dangerous, but not welcome either. Can I help you? Ethan asked. I hope so, the man replied. My name's Raymond Leonard. I'm looking for my daughter. Ethan opened the door. Your daughter? Yes. Her name is Hope Leonard. Or it was. Behind him, Hope appeared. Pale. Frozen. Dad. He turned slowly, like someone waking from a dream. Hope, he whispered. You're alive. They sat inside, the tea growing cold. Hope perched on the couch, tense. Raymond slumped in the armchair, hollow-eyed. Ethan stood nearby, protective. I thought you were dead, Raymond said. The police gave up. Your friends gave up. Your mother stopped saying your name. She said grieving was easier than not knowing. You never came, Hope said. I did, he insisted. But your name was gone. No records. No trail. Ethan's voice broke in, low and clear. He lied to everyone, even her. Raymond nodded. I know. After the arrest, after the truth came out. But it doesn't make the time I lost easier. Hope sat straighter. You don't get to say that. You didn't believe me. You said I was dramatic, that he was just stressed. I was wrong, he said, voice cracking. God, I was so wrong. Silence stretched. I'm not who I was, she said finally. I don't want the past. I just need to know. You're not here to take this from me. I wouldn't dare, he whispered. You've built something better than I ever gave you. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. She nodded. You just did. Later, on the porch, Hope looked up at the stars. He was the last ghost, she said softly. The last piece of me that belonged to the girl who apologized too much, who mistook silence for love. Ethan nodded. You didn't owe him forgiveness. I didn't give it, she said. I gave him closure. There was a difference. The next day, Raymond came one last time. He handed her a box, weathered and old. I kept this, he said, even when I thought I'd never see you again. Inside were drawings, a seashell, a note she'd written long ago. I love you, even when you yell. She stared at it and nodded. Goodbye, Dad. Raymond didn't reach for her. No embrace. No lingering goodbye. Just a quiet, resolute, I'm proud of you. Before he turned and walked back to his car, leaving only tire whispers on the gravel and a chapter closed in silence. Hope stood still, the box clutched tightly against her chest like the weight of old sorrow. And as his taillights faded into the horizon, Ethan appeared beside her, steady, unwavering. She looked up at him with calm determination. Let's bury it, she said, her voice barely louder than the breeze. I don't want to carry it anymore. They found a small patch of earth near the flower bed, where spring's early blooms dared to rise. Together, they dug a shallow grave, gently lowered the box inside, and covered it with soil. Hope patted the ground once, tender and final, as though tucking an old ghost in for its last sleep. That night, beneath the velvet hush of dusk, they danced. No music, no stage, just the rustling leaves and the laughter of Jacob echoing in the distance, threading through the trees like a song only hearts could hear. Ethan took her hand and spun her under the fading light, their joy mingling with the sweet scent of lilacs and upturned soil. And in that soft and sacred moment, Hope knew. The past had been honored, but it would no longer define her. It started with a single white bloom. Hope found it one quiet morning after the rain, nestled shyly near the back porch. A lone crocus, trembling from the night's chill, its petals delicate yet defiant as they reached for the light. She crouched beside it, fingers brushing the damp soil around its roots. There you are, she whispered. She hadn't planted it. Perhaps Ava had long ago. Or maybe it was dropped by a bird, an unmeant gift that had blossomed into meaning all the same. Regardless of how it came, she took it as a sign. Spring had come, and it had chosen to stay. By late April, the garden was fully hers. The wild, neglected earth behind the cabin had transformed into neat rows of kale, beans, and early lettuce. Along the outer edges, she planted marigolds and lavender, not just for color, but because she believed beauty could keep pests away better than any harsh chemical ever could. Jacob helped after school, painting labels with proud little hands, carrots, beans, lettuce. Ethan had built a weathered bench beneath the old oak tree, where he often sat in the evenings, sipping from a chipped mug, watching her with quiet admiration, his sleeves rolled up, heart wide open, like the soil beneath her feet. And Hope. She no longer flinched at sudden noises. She no longer kept a bag packed by the door. Her hair flowed freely now, dancing in the breeze without apology. Somewhere along the way, no one could say exactly when, she began to laugh without checking the room first, as if waiting for permission. She didn't need it anymore. The garden grew, and so did everything else. Hope began volunteering at the Pine Grove Library twice a week, reading picture books to squirming toddlers and reshelving romance novels in the adult section. She signed up for an online course in early childhood education. She didn't know exactly where it would lead, but for the first time in years, she was curious about later. One Saturday morning, Jacob burst into the kitchen, holding a flyer. "You should open a booth at the spring fair," he beamed. "We could sell your flowers." Hope laughed. "It's a vegetable garden, sweetheart." "But you grow the pretty stuff too," he insisted, eyes bright. "And people would come just to see you smile." Ethan leaned against the counter, watching her. "He's right." She looked from one to the other, her fingers brushing the paper. Then she folded the flyer and tucked it into her notebook. "Maybe," she said softly, and maybe no longer meant no. That evening, they dined beneath the open sky on the back porch. Roasted chicken, salad straight from the garden, cornbread still steaming from the oven. Fireflies blinked lazily around them as dusk rolled in like a sigh. Jacob spun an elaborate tale about a pirate-turned gardener who fell in love with a mermaid who hated dirt. Hope and Ethan listened as though it were sacred lore. Later, as the stars emerged one by one, Hope joined Ethan by the fire pit. He was poking at the coals with a stick, a thoughtful look on his face. "I never imagined this," she said, her voice a hush. "This kind of life. I used to dream about freedom, but it always meant leaving, running, escaping, never staying, never roots." Ethan nodded slowly. "That's because no one told you freedom could feel like staying." She leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. "At the library, they sometimes ask for my full name for forms. Records," she murmured. "I hesitate, not because I don't know who I am now, but because I never had a name I chose. Not really." He turned slightly, brushing his fingers along her cheek. "Then choose one," he said. "Make it yours." She looked out at the garden, at the single white bloom, still tall despite the wind. "I want to be called Hope Leonard Callahan," she said. Ethan didn't speak right away. Then a smile spread across his face. "Slow, sure. We can make that official." She turned to him, her breath catching. "Are you asking?" He set the stick aside, took her hands into his. I wasn't planning to tonight." He chuckled nervously. "But yes, I am now. I don't have a ring yet," he added, "but I have this place, this garden, this home. I have Jacob, who already calls you his almost mom, and I have a promise to make you. Every morning I wake up beside you." Hope didn't cry. She only smiled, brighter than dawn, realer than ever, unafraid. "Yes," she whispered. 100 times yes. The next morning, they told Jacob. He hooped, bouncing on his toes. "Can I walk her down the aisle? Even though she's not going anywhere." Ethan ruffled his hair. "That's exactly why." And Hope beamed. For the first time in her life, the past didn't vanish, it softened. It faded into perspective. Not erased, but no longer in charge. She was no longer a woman running. No longer nameless. No longer voiceless. She was Hope Leonard Callahan. By choice. By love. By miracle. And in the garden that now bore her name, her future was growing. Row by row, breath by breath, beside her. They were married on the last Sunday of May beneath the tall cottonwoods. No church pews. No aisle. No string quartet. Just folding chairs borrowed from neighbors, wildflowers from the meadow, and the sky so blue it felt hand-painted. Hope wore a simple linen dress that danced at her ankles, her hair loose and free, like sunlight. Around her wrist, the red scarf, softened by time, fluttered like a ribbon of memory. Ethan wore the same shirt he'd worn the day they walked Main Street together, Jacob swinging between them. During the ceremony, Jacob stood between them like a proud guardian, holding the ring box with the grin of someone who knew a beautiful secret. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," said the county clerk, "and I believe someone has something to say." Jacob stepped forward with the courage of a boy who had found his forever. "I think we're the best family on this whole mountain," he declared, "and if anyone wants to argue, we'll throw a pie at him." Laughter erupted like sunlight through trees. Hope knelt, pulling him close. "You're the best part of this family." He whispered in her ear, "You're my best mom. For real." Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. Not anymore. The reception was simple. Potluck tables, mason jars of daisies, lemonade, peach cobbler. Hope danced barefoot with Ethan under the cottonwoods, the grass cool beneath them, his hand steady at her waist. At first, there was only the music of nature, wind, leaves, a bird here or there. Then someone brought out a speaker and played an old folk song Ava used to hum. Ethan froze. "You okay?" Hope asked gently. He nodded, voice thick. She'd have liked this. She always wanted to see the garden bloom again. "She sees it now," Hope whispered, forehead to his. They danced until the stars blinked above like old friends. Later that night, with Jacob asleep and a quilt on the porch swing, Hope and Ethan walked into the moonlit garden. "I used to fear roots," Hope said. "I thought they made me easier to trap, easier to burn." He waited. "But now, I see. Roots don't trap. They anchor, and they grow toward light." He turned her to face him, warmth in his eyes. "You've always been light." She smiled softly. "No, but you showed me how to find it again." In the weeks that followed, the cabin felt alive, not with noise, but with fullness, with presence. Hope painted pantry shelves. Ethan fixed steps. Jacob ran wild between them, comic books in one hand, peanut butter on his face. The mailbox filled again, not with fear, but with invitations, catalogs, life. People started calling her Hope Leonard Callahan, not because it was legal, but because she wore it with pride. One afternoon, Jacob stood at the garden gate with a weathered notebook. "Can I read you my poem?" He cleared his throat, voice bold. "There once was a star that fell from the sky, and everyone thought it was gone, but it landed here in our backyard and grew into something strong. Now we have a garden and a mom who laughs and sings, and I know that sometimes stars come back as living things." Hope's hand flew to her mouth. Ethan blinked hard. Jacob closed the notebook. "It's for the school contest, but I don't care if I win." "You already did," Ethan said, pulling him close. Hope kissed the top of his head. "You saw me before I did." Jacob shrugged. "I just knew you were mine." That night, as stars wheeled above and peace settled around them, Hope and Ethan rocked on the porch swing, tea in hand, blanket across their knees. "Do you remember the first time you saw me?" she asked. "All the time," he replied. "What did you see?" He paused. "Then, someone frozen, afraid, broken, but also someone who hadn't given up yet." Hope leaned closer, eyes soft. "You whispered, 'Stay with me forever.' I meant it." "I know," she whispered. "That whisper saved me." And in the quiet night, wrapped in memory and healing, Hope exhaled. Not fear, not sorrow, but peace. She had fallen, but not into ruin. She had landed in the light, and at last she was home.